Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein sentenced to 23 years behind bars, 20 years for criminal sexual assault, 3 years for third-degree rape. Those sentences to be served consecutively.
You may already know who Harvey Weinstein is, but for those of you who don't, Harvey Weinstein is the founder of the Weinstein Company and Miramax, household names that produced movies such as Kill Bill and Scream. Weinstein has been accused of sexual misconduct in 2017 and just recently in March 2020 was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Weinstein misused his power to systematically rape women trying to make a living in the film industry. Being one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood, he would request meetings with women and tell them that he can make them famous in return for sexual favors. Many actresses spoke out against Weinstein, such as Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie. But how has Weinstein been able to do such horrible things for so long without anyone saying anything? To understand how much power Weinstein wielded, we have to look into how he played into politics to be able to get away from the horrific things he has done for all these years. Not only being one of the most powerful film producers in the early 90s, Weinstein entered the political arena by starting to make small contributions to Barbara Boxer, the senator of California at the time. In the late half of the 90s, he supported the Clintons in their re-election campaign. In 2002, he contributed tens of thousands of dollars to the Democratic National Committee. And when Obama won the election in 2008, he supported his administration while also giving his single largest contribution of $32,400 to the DNC. And later in 2014, he also supported Senator Chuck Schumer with plans to give tax breaks to theater production. As we can see, Weinstein had ties to many powerful figures, and that can give us some insight to understand how he was perceived in the industry. With someone with so much influence over your career, it is not outlandish to understand why you would keep your mouth shut if you see your boss do something questionable. A story that has moved me more than others is the story of Rowena Chiu. Though the problem of racial discrimination is not the basis of my presentation, it does play a factor into the sexual abuse towards the women of color. In 1998, it was Rowena Chiu's dream to be successful in the film industry. Freshly graduated from Oxford with a degree in English literature, she was able to assist Harvey with his European productions in London. She was told by a colleague, Zelda Perkins, that Harvey, her new boss, had a reputation of inappropriate behavior and rage, and that she would need to find a strategic way to handle him, and she would be fine if she did. Later during the Venice Film Festival, in a late-night meeting with Harvey in his hotel room, after going over a few scripts, he would force himself on Rowena, saying he has never had a Chinese girl. Barely escaping, she would later reconcile with Perkins and attempt to take action against Harvey. But at the time, no matter what she did, she was powerless against the mighty movie mogul. Her actions will eventually turn against her, forcing her into an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which would ultimately silence her from speaking of the altercation to anyone. This made it difficult to receive therapy. 20 years later, when the Me Too movement started to rise, after witnessing another woman speaking up against Brett Kavanaugh, it took her a while to actually be able to speak up as she was afraid of the journalists that might show up to her house, or the death threats that her and her family would receive. Eventually, she was able to share her story on the Today Show, breaking the silence after 21 years. In the interview, she talks about many power imbalances, but the one that stuck out to me the most was the one around race and how that factored into her being sexually abused. This hits close to home for me, as I am also Southeast Asian. The stereotype for Asians is that we are the model minority, a group of immigrants who prove to be more successful than other immigrants. This comes with traits of being extremely smart in math and science, with having awkward and submissive personalities. But the stereotype generalizes all Asians into one, even though Asia is home to many different cultures. Though these stereotypes do not come without some truth, it is true that many Asian families prefer not to stand out of the crowd or cause disturbances, especially against a superior. Many Asian cultures are patriarchal in nature, and it is disrespectful to talk back to someone that is of a higher ranking position. This is detrimental to many Asian women suffering sexual abuse, as it is in their best interest to keep quiet and not make a scene that can be perceived as embarrassing. But there is one organization that is there to help change that culture.
Very good, Dean.
Green carboxyl, which are the purple and the black.
Day is on the horizon.
The Weinstein case reignited the Me Too movement around the world, empowering many women who have been sexually harassed to speak up, having many men in power being put in check with the new outrage. Originally, Me Too was started in 2006 by Tarana Burke, a survivor of sexual assault who wanted to help colored women who also survived sexual violence. The term resurfaced in the heat of the Weinstein allegations and has taken off ever since. Sexual harassment is now being talked about more than ever, and in these times, many women have been coming out with their stories, slowly changing how the world views sexual harassment. One factor that is not being confronted dealing with sexual harassment is men's view on masculinity and what boys are taught from a young age of what a man is supposed to be. The root of the problem of sexual harassment is not the specific act, but it stems from the early age of how boys perceive masculinity and how some of those behaviors are toxic.
I think we have got to show our sons a new definition of manhood. Now, the definition of manhood is already turning upside down. I mean, you've read about how the new economy is changing the roles of caregiver and wage earner. They're throwing it up in the air. So our sons are going to have to find some way of adapting to this, some new relationship with each other. And I think we really have to show them and model for them how a real man is someone who trusts his sisters and respects them and wants to be on their team and stands up against the real bad guys, who are the men who want to abuse the women.
In an article by the National Criminal Justice Reference Services, it explains some of the theories we know about sexually abusive behavior in children. Sexually abusive behavior is effective in alleviating the child's emotional distress and also provides sexual gratification and pleasure. Behavior is learned and reinforced. Causes of child sexual abuse, however, remains elusive. Multiple theories have been proposed to explain the roots of sexual abusive behavior that concerns socialization, family dysfunction, and victimization. Movies are an outlet for people to learn, especially children. Movies and films have a mirror-like quality and reflect and reinforce ideas from a given culture. Companies such as Disney are a hugely powerful force in Hollywood. Disney famously produces family-themed movies. It is also famous for their princess movies such as Snow White. This can subconsciously enforce gender stereotypes. But recently, Disney has been changing the narrative of their movies. Professor Greg Foster from the Christian Science Monitor pointed out something that was worth looking into concerning Disney. I'm observing something that appears to be an intentional project to create new methods of storytelling. A new sort of expectation that when we tell stories, we're not just here to entertain you for a short time. We're here to teach you about what matters in life. I think there's a lot of concern about the moral direction of American culture, and there is a lot to be alarmed about. But what I've been calling the new Disney animation really does reconnect people in ways that cut through boundaries. So it includes people of different religions, people of different races, people of different economic backgrounds. These films are not distinctive to a particular cultural subgroup, and that means it can be a force for good in the cultural at large rather than being sort of one group's possession. In the past and currently, the film industry has been dominated by men. A study done by the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film indicated in 2018, 20% of all women filled in roles such as directors, writers, producers, executive producers, editors, and cinematographers in the top 250 domestic grossing films. Films with women directors will comprise 24% of composers that are women compared to male directors, which drops down to 7%. This discrepancy of women in the film industry makes it harder for women to break into the industry, as the majority of directors, which are male, are less likely to hire females into the behind-the-scenes roles. Introducing more women into the film industry can help change an industry once dominated by men to create movies with a new narrative. In a survey of 843 women working in the film industry by USA Today, 94% says that they have experienced sexual harassment or assault. That number is staggering to look at, and this number is only from a very small portion of the industry. Keep in mind, this number does not represent the whole film industry. Mainly, 87% of women experienced unwelcome sexual comments, jokes, or gestures, and 69% reported that they had been touched in a sexual way. They have also found out that women in the film industry younger than 30 are more likely to report incidents compared with older respondents. This information makes it hopeful that younger women in the film industry are speaking out against sexual harassment, hopefully seeing those numbers rise within the coming years. What is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment is the behavior characterized by the making of unwelcome and inappropriate sexual remarks, advances in a workplace or other professional or social situations. Sexual harassment is also a form of sex discrimination.
Sexual harassment doesn't discriminate. You can wear a skirt, hospital scrubs, army fatigues. You can be young or old, married or single, black or white. You can be a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent.
Also, the people affected are the sexually harassed, sexual harassers, and companies. In time, what ultimately needs to change is the culture of how masculinity and femininity is perceived. But cultures around the world are vastly different from one another, and not all cultures will change in the same way. The Me Too movement is taking steps into the right direction, but ultimately, places like Hollywood that hold much influence on culture needs to help stop influencing toxic gender stereotypes. Preventing gender bias at an early age can help reduce sexual harassment by making younger people aware of it. It will also help people identify what sexual harassment is and aid in confronting the problem head-on. Just like all things that require change, this will take time. Though many celebrities and organizations are preaching out and supporting victims of sexual harassment, it is hopeful to see that this change is happening sooner than later. Companies that do not have policies on sexual harassment support inappropriate behavior. In hiding sexual misconduct through creating hostile work environments, companies should get hit with a class action lawsuit citing the RICO Act. In 1970, Congress passed the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act. Mainly, the law establishes severe consequences for those who engage in a pattern of wrongdoing as a member of a criminal enterprise. After the news of Weinstein's allegations, the Weinstein Company was sued by a single Jane Doe actress alleging negligence. In paperwork obtained by ABC News, members of the Weinstein Company were aware of Harvey's habits of sexual misconduct but still continued to allow him to host private auditions with prospecting actresses in private locations such as hotel rooms. The RICO Act is a great example of taking down large corporations who protect people such as Weinstein. With the wave of women speaking up against these once powerful corporations, the tides of power are shifting into the individual as sexual predators are no longer safe from the silence of fear. In Kantian ethics logic, sexual harassment is wrong in nature and stopping it is the right thing to do. In utilitarianism ethics logic, ending sexual harassment creates the greatest good for all people by giving people a safe environment to live in. Some biases that I know that I'm aware of is that I'm a Southeast Asian male. My parents, coming from a more traditional life, taught us to do gender-specific roles, such as yard work for boys and cooking for girls. But as my parents started spending more time in the US, we became less traditional and the labor became less gender-orientated. Growing up with women in my life may affect my judgment because I was taught to look after my sister no matter what. I think my point of view may have been different growing up with all males because I would not have the family background with women, making me less aware of what they go through. Another bias that I have is that I live in the United States. Living in the United States has one of the most progressive societies with idealism and change. I think that the culture of the United States makes me more inclined to change compared to different countries.